Welcome to Establish the Edge. I'm your host, Mike Leone. Have a really exciting episode here today. I have the three members of the Go Bills team that won the FFPC main event in back-to-back years. This is the first time, if I'm correct, that anyone has ever won this contest in back-to-back years, which is pretty insane. I think it was like nearly 4,000 teams last year. 2 years ago, you guys took down a $500,000 grand prize. Last year, $1 million. So living large. The team is Dom, Sean, and Nick. And I have to mention, of course, with the Go Bills team name, that they are from Buffalo. So I've got my Bills hoodie on for this stream, and you can watch it on the Establish the Edge YouTube channel. But yeah, fellas, thanks so much for joining me. Congrats on your success so far.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks for having us. We're excited to be here.
Yeah, and I met you guys in person, I believe, for the first time in Vegas in between your two main event victories. Had my first and only to date soul-crushing credit card roulette loss. It came down to me and Nick, but we had an awesome meal. I think it was like Craft Steak, I think was the place, and we had a really good meal there. So that was awesome. But yeah, I'll throw it to Dom and just kind of want to hear a little bit about how you guys got together, starting drafting teams to begin with, like, and how long you guys have known each other.
Yeah, we've known each other for, oh gosh, I don't have an exact date on it, but 10, 15 years now, at least. Like, we kind of grew up together. Started as many people do in fantasy football, right? It was like as you're kind of a teenager in home leagues with your friends. As you get older, like the buy-ins go up and you get more and more serious about it. Eventually, the three of us kind of found out about like high stakes fantasy in general and the FFPC. So the three of us being like competitive people that we are, naturally, once you find out about playing the top competition, you want to get involved. So Sean and I did a football guys, one team together just to get our feet wet. And then when we jumped into the main events, knowing Nick was a really good fantasy player also, we asked him to be involved and kind of took it from there.
Yeah, that's awesome. Sean, I know you've got a little bit of a poker background as well. I'm assuming that helps in the fantasy streets.
Yeah, a lot of similar theories when it comes to like game theory and approaching large sample sizes and things of that nature. How you attack what a population is doing, maybe making a mistake, how you deviate from what the population is doing to kind of gain an edge on the field. A lot of concepts that really cross over from the poker world into fantasy football. So that's been a benefit for me, just having that background already, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And I kind of want to split this pod into two segments. One, just talking about how you guys operate as a team in general is pretty interesting to me. And then two, talking about the FFPC main event itself. And a good segue into operating as a team, as we were joking about pre-stream, was, had a little bit of a difficult draft on the ETR live stream the other night with myself, Adam Levitan, and Evan Silva, and probably, a good example of how to not operate together as a team in a live draft, though the entertainment was good. You guys, I'm assuming, are a pretty well-oiled machine by this point. Dom mentioned that you've been doing it for so long. So Nick, like, how are you guys prepping, before the draft? I've seen Sean's like old school draft board that he like writes out tiers on. Does that make it to Vegas to the main event drafts?
Oh yeah, actually, I'm usually the creator of those draft boards. I like having every draft. I create one of those boards the day of to try and get the most up-to-date ADP, and then I'll highlight all those players and tiers. Usually, I'll do that with at least one of the boys just to kind of see if our tiers are similar. But yeah, we like having at least one of those boards for sure. That helps. Just like for me, I like looking at that board as we're going. Dom and Sean will have the draft board open, and they'll kind of look at the players on there, and it'll just kind of help us so that we don't miss anything. We all make our own rankings before the season with tiers too. So we'll go through those rankings and kind of see where we differentiate. And we each have like a final say on draft board. So we talk through sometimes like I'll have a guy that I really like, and the other two will have not as strong of a feeling. But if it's my final say, I can kind of like rule them off if I feel so strongly about it. But for the most part, we have a majority rule, and that works really well for us.
Okay, nice. Yeah, that makes sense. And obviously, as seen on the ETR live draft, touching base on the player tiers ahead of time seems like a must, because you don't want to be arguing stuff mid draft that like
Yeah.
should be hashed out already.
Yep.
Like I'll get into, like, I'm sure there's some deviations, but um that kind of touched on one of my questions, like how you guys are touching base on player takes. And seems like a pretty tier based approach. You guys are comparing draft boards as far as like macro strategy, in terms of roster construction, or like where you think you can attack guys at ADP. How much of that are you talking about ahead of time, or are you guys kind of feeling that out on the fly? Sean, I'll throw that to you.
Yeah, we do a ton of prep work on that side of things ahead. Generally, we try to use, and I'll shout him out like I do in every podcast, we try to use Darren Armani's Fantasy Mojo tools for ADP, so we can have a good idea of where the ADP sits for the FFPC main event, as close to current as possible, and then we'll go in ahead of time and do mock builds based on that ADP. So we'll build different structures, whether it's a hero running back build, a zero running back build, a build that attacks an early quarterback, or aggressive or on an early tight end if it makes sense for that in terms of ADP. So we have different builds prepped already, and then we decide what we like out of those builds, how we feel the optimal build from that draft slot will be made, and then we just take what the draft gives us. If there's a big faller, you try to attack that value as best you can, but then you build your structure based on what you have in the early rounds and based on what you know and what you've prepped for.
Yeah, fooling around with different early builds definitely seems to make sense, because sometimes you have to pivot in the draft. And if you've just kind of committed to one build, and then like one of you sort of sees like it's just not happening this draft, and you want to pivot, like that's easy to do on your own, but it can be hard with a group of people. I did an NFFC 10K with the ship chasing guys, Peter Overset, Pat Crane, and Ben Gretsch last year, and we were pretty prepared for them. That was something we kind of talked about, where like we didn't want to start early running backs in the NFFC format being 3 wide receiver, but Eckler fell to a point in the first round where he was like, we're going to take him there. And then if we can get Brees here, we're going to take him. And then structurally, we'll just draft every young wide receiver after to try and catch breakouts. So like we were on the page that we were able to make that pivot when it occurred during the draft. Whereas had we not, it might've been tough to just sell like, oh, let's take Brees here. And it's like, no, we need wide receivers. So that makes a ton of sense to me. And as far as in the draft itself, Nick mentioned a little bit how you guys are kind of, two of you are looking sort of like at the site and the board, and he's got like the manual written big board. Are you divvying up duties, Dom, or it's like one guy tracking tiers, one guy tracking ADP, or is it kind of like everybody doing a little bit?
Yeah, everyone's doing a little bit. I know I have like a few monitors at home, and I'm pretty used to keeping track of multiple things at the same time. Nick alluded to earlier, one of the things that we found helpful with a 3-man group. So obviously, like there's some situations where you'll kind of need to vote or come to like a majority consensus, whatever you want to call it. One of the things in like the first year that we noticed some like friction pain points on that we try to improve on is the situation where you're with 3 people have a strong lean, right? Like I think it's player A, I think it's player B. And then the third guy kind of gets caught in the middle, and it's like, I don't have a strong take here. And it's weird because like they're the tiebreaker deciding vote, but then they don't have a strong take. It's one of those things you kind of need to improve on and get better as a team. We did the final say trump card kind of mix here. So it's like, okay, all of our main event teams, someone has final say on that team. So someone is, whether that person's actually clicking, like they're making the final call, and like you can trump the other 2 players if you want to. You can work to get to a consensus if you want to. But for us, it was kind of a way to like make those decisions a little cleaner and not kind of put one person stuck between the middle of 2 strong takes. So I think that really helped from year 1 to year 2, kind of changing that framework for us. And we've definitely just it helps that we're close friends. It helps that we trust each other and we don't like bring an ego to all these conversations, just like assuming one of us is right. Like I truly believe that 3 sharp fantasy people working together can do better than any one of them individually. The whole is going to be greater than the sum of its parts if you check your ego, if you're willing to listen to other people that you trust are putting in the work, and you'll just improve at it and get better at it over time. So definitely now by this point, like the arguments or kind of mismanagement situations, those are happening much less often. We're much more experienced and better at the partnership than we were before.
Yeah, I like the trump card system. Obviously, if you're only doing one draft, that can be difficult for who gets the trump card. But I think Sean had mentioned to me that you're doing 9. I'm assuming it's like 3, 3, and 3 as far as the trump card being split up. I do like that. I like your point, Dom, too, about like 3 minds being greater than 1. I know have had success in these NFFC drafts with the ship chasing guys. We're doing another one this year, 2,500 the week of the season, and it's a good combination where we have like enough in common and enough different that like we meet in the middle, and it ends up working out pretty well. Like macro strategy, I think we're on the same page. I might lean into like projection stuff a little bit more, and Gretch might be a little bit more into like player archetypes, and then kind of meeting in the middle. We've had a lot of success being able to do that. Anything else as far as how the team operates, how things go in season? Who gets stuck doing waivers, or is that a collective group?
No, that's a fun like 2-day project. We all spend time on Discord, and we try to keep it to like an hour and a half, but inevitably 3 good friends like kind of noodle on things and just talk through like all sorts of different combinations. I mean, we typically try to be as forward looking as we can, right? And we're sensitive to kind of all the things you mentioned, whether it's player archetypes or upcoming bye weeks or just like macro construction. We're spending a good amount of time like actually talking kind of on Discord on the phone, right? And no one's like, even if you're like have the final say on a team, like we all kind of work together on waivers. I know like my process is like kind of right after games, I'll go through and do like a quick pass on waivers, whether there's like obvious players that you can add for the week or just like literally just like scroll through the position list and just get something started. Like, so we usually get all the players and like the order of our bids kind of first, and then the dollar amounts are like the final thing. That's like the art, not the science, right? Like when someone asks like how do you do waivers, how do you come up with a number, it's like it's not the most easy thing in the world. Like experience is definitely going to dictate a lot of what you do, but we try to do like kind of that first, and we try to work at it all together, right? We don't want leave no stone unturned. Like 3 eyes are better than 1 on waivers. Like we all kind of put in the work and trust each other.
Yeah, I think a lot of people underestimate how important waivers are. Like we wouldn't have won last year without the couple waiver ads that we had in Jerick McKinnon and Zay Jones. So like you have to be on there every Wednesday and Sunday morning trying to find anything that has like life out there on waivers, because you never know when you're going to find a league winner out there.
Yeah, and I know like that's my weak link is like spending time on waivers, but to Dom's point, especially like way back in the day, I used to play a ton of season-long fantasy baseball, and setting that like initial list, even if it's like a super quick pass, I felt like helped to limit mistakes and just speed things up on like the day of the actual deadline, to just have something in place rather than starting completely from scratch helped a lot. Let's dovetail into FFPC main event strategy a little bit different. Year 1, I remember you guys hit the absolute nuts because we had an NFFC team that was like close, but not nearly as good. I think that was the year, what was like Debo, Chase, Cup.
Andrews.
I mean, it was just the pure nuts draft. And then year 2, I know was different. Nick, you mentioned getting Zay Jones and Jerick McKinnon via waivers. So just kind of different routes to victory, where year 1 was just kind of the triumph from the beginning, just let that team play. And then year 2 was more of the grind. So Nick, I don't know if you want to speak a little bit to how those 2 years kind of played out, or just reminisce nostalgically over that year 1 team that was drafted.
Yeah, the 2 year ago team, that team was literally a dream. I don't think you can't draft a team as good as that. Like I think that's going to be the last time you see a team where you have legitimately 6 or 7 guys going in the first 2 rounds the following year. We didn't have a good RB2 that year, and it didn't even matter. We got that decision wrong almost every week in the beginning of the season, and our team was still scoring 170 plus every week. So that team didn't really require a ton of work. The team last year required as much work as you could ask for. Honestly, we had decision making every week throughout the year, and then in the sprint we had a pivotal decision between Zonovan Knight and Zay Jones, and we looked at Darren Armani's site and we saw that Zonovan Knight was 75% owned. So we were like, you know what? Why don't we fade this guy since we're not in the top? Let's go with a little bit like a less owned guy in Zay Jones, who was also playing Dallas, and we had CeeDee Lamb. So we had a little bring back option. So we were just playing that game being a shootout, and Zay Jones was a WR1 that week. So that catapulted us into first place because we had 222 points that week. And then the following week, we actually benched Zay Jones when he had one catch. So we were just pulling all the right strings.
I knew that you had benched him the second week. I didn't realize you had that 50-50 decision the first week, which is really interesting to note how you guys are, thinking through, like kind of taking the DFS element of it. Like it's a large field tournament at that point during the sprint, and you want lower owned, high upside. And you guys, again, like hitting that parlay where you played Zay Jones, hit the low owned play on him, but then you sat him the next week. I remember there were weather issues in that game, and I was amazed at how many
Thursday against the Jets.
Yeah, and it was rain. And it was like
rainy.
I was stunned how many people like weren't adjusting on that. Again, like kind of DFS mindset. Like I'm so used to paying close attention to the weather. I think maybe sometimes in the season long streets it doesn't get to play. But you guys benched him, which created the dynamic where you not only pulled this lever to gain leverage on all the non-Zay Jones team week one, but now you've beaten all the Zay Jones teams because those teams mostly just played him again week two.
It's hard benching the WR1 the next week after he just catapulted you. That takes some big stones to pull that one off.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to ask some more playoff specific questions. Before I do that, I was going to ask how many teams you generally draft. Noted it's 9. How many did you draft the previous 2 years when you won? Do you remember main event specifically?
Yeah, year one we drafted 4, and then year 2 we drafted 7. And it was our 6th of 7 teams, one of the live drafts in Vegas actually, that let Travis Kelce fall to the 12th pick and catapulted us to the magic victory. It was the latest Travis Kelce pick you could have gotten last year, and obviously that was the nuts you could possibly get because we got a unique build with Kelce, which getting Kelce with CeeDee Lamb, with Devontae Smith, with Mahomes was just a crazy combination. But yeah, we drafted 4 and then 7.
We were trying to round out our like elite tight end exposure going into Vegas last year. And so that draft was first, and we were like, okay, we don't have Kelce, we don't have Andrews yet. Think we might be able to get Kelce on the second team, right? And then he falls to 12 to us in the first draft. And I was like, okay, and it actually worked out perfectly because our second team, we got Andrews. To your point about the playoffs, just piggybacking on it a little bit. I mean, we were a Mahomes Kelce team last year. Now the price is a bit different, right? It was the end of the first and the top of the 6th that we got Kelce and Mahomes last year, both pretty good prices. But that stack was quite highly owned coming into the sprint. So it was one of those things you had to be cognizant of, like, okay, the team was in like 100th or so. So, I mean, it's, top 20% of teams, but not like last year, right? Like not the first place overall points leader. You have other Kelce Mahomes teams ahead of you. You're aware of Zonovan Knight ownership. Like this is what you kind of need to be fearless in some of this decision making here, or like a DFS approach, or you really do need to be cognizant of like the stacking and where you can get some leverage. You're seeing it this year in ADP too, particularly with the elite quarterbacks. Like that stack, whether it's Diggs Allen, Hurts Devontae, Kelce Mahomes again, by ADP, that stack is really lining up where it's pretty easy to get it. So not necessarily that you need to steer away from the expensive stack, but it's just something you're going to need to think of, especially if you bring one of those teams to the sprint at the end.
Yeah, I think people are more aware of stacking now. So you mentioned the ADPs are lining up where you can get it, and it's like hard to know if that's chicken or egg, where like, is it lining up like organically, or is it because people are making that stack? And that's where the ADP is. And the game's definitely evolving, but not just in the playoffs, but yeah, just curious in general how this structure of this tournament affects how you draft. Like you mentioned the stacking, going in trying to get stacking, but playoff schedules and just the fragility of different builds and shooting for ceiling. How does the fact that this is a really top heavy kind of large field for season long contest impact your decision making on draft day? Or is it just, or do you try not to overthink that and just build like these really quality upside type teams?
I think it matters. I mean, you're definitely shooting for the late season upside, whether that's, young receivers, which has been the kind of the secret sauce to winning fantasy teams over the last few years, getting that youth at receiver, those guys who really start to break out in the second half. But looking at the schedules for weeks 15 and 16 and 17 for teams, looking at who they play, looking at the potential weather issues you might have. I mean, there might be an elite team that plays 3 potential awful weather games in that stretch, and now you're in a position where, yeah, you might get those guys and your team looks good, but then you come into 3 blizzard condition games down the stretch and you can't win. So you have to be a little cognizant of that, of the scheduling there. But yeah, in general for strategy, because it's a top heavy end of season stretch, you really want to be focused on the players that you think are going to be hitting their stride or, hitting their peak towards the end of the season, which generally tends to be younger players, rookies, players who kind of enter the lineup halfway through the year. They may be fresher towards the end, and they're younger, and they have that talent that that kind of extreme upside case that you can win a league with.
Yeah, and dovetailing that into just like how you guys feel about macro strategies, like heading the draft and dealing with player takes and archetypes. I know you guys have watched Ship Chasing. I believe you guys are RotoViz guys. You correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like your drafts kind of do a good job of taking like a lot of those lessons in terms of wide receiver youth. You mentioned Sean, and avoiding some of the running back landmines, but then maybe layer in some more, practicality might be the wrong word, but factoring in projection, maybe perhaps a little bit more. And I know too that the way this is structured, the regular season is weeks 1 through 12 now,
12, yeah.
Which is, and at one point it was weeks 1 through 11. And that's a shorter regular season to give yourself time if you're building like a full 0 RB team or depend on a ton of rookies. So, how do you guys kind of, I guess, like see your macro strategy or things you're trying to accomplish in the draft?
I'll say for me personally, I guess, I think it was a couple years ago, and I'm sure some other people have written about this, but I know Jack Miller, I think it was 2 years ago, posted a series on running back archetypes, and that really, really stuck with me. It was, I think, one of the most important things I have learned playing fantasy football, like high stakes over the last few years, is not just everyone has player takes, right? Like everyone kind of understands floor, ceiling, projection based. Like there can be some nuance to it, but I think most people playing at the highest levels kind of get that. What I think people miss sometimes, and you don't even really need to apply this to just running backs, although I think it works particularly well for like rounding out a running back room and trying to figure out what mix of players you need to get through the season. I mean, you can do this like if you're doing like a punt quarterback or a punt tight end build. I think this kind of stuff is really important. Receivers as well. I mean, I think many of us understand and appreciate like the value that rookies and just younger players can provide in those middle rounds of the draft, but just like understanding the texture of like what the whole group looks like together, because this team, it is a short regular season, right? So like you're often going to need, if you do like rookies, like you're going to need other players maybe to supplement and make some kind of tough decisions, to play some more kind of projectable players at different points, but just like not drafting too many of the same types of guy, like not going, not being like very dogmatic in how you build your teams, like trying to build well-rounded teams. And then from there, after draft night, if you are a good fantasy player, you appreciate like the gamesmanship aspect and leaving no stone unturned, right? Like play the game to the best extent that you can, whether that's working as hard as you can on waivers, staying 2 or 3 weeks ahead of like defenses or handcuff running backs for $1, like trying to just get someone before they cost, 100 waiver dollars for a week. Like play the game as best you can. And like that well-rounded, kind of complete archetype running back, tight end, whatever your exact team kind of needs. I mean, that was one of the strategies that really stuck with me the most. And it's like very important to how we draft and like what we're thinking of when we're building out teams.
Yeah, that's really well put, well articulated. I'm going to ruminate on that some, but I know like, yeah, finding that perfect line between having like good median points without sacrificing your ceiling. And I know put the whole, like how the archetypes of the RB room fit together. That's something that I think people consider a lot in best ball, but maybe don't consider enough in managed. They look at that a little bit differently. So I can see where that, that comes together. I know with Drew Dinkmeyer a couple of years ago, we were talking to about like, you got your 2 down grinders, you can score touchdowns. You've got kind of your safe pass catchers who are going to rack up PPR points but don't have a ceiling. You've got your pure handcuffs who like are complete zeros, but then they have this big ceiling if the injury happens in front of them. So I like that. As far as how FFPC in specific operates, so you've got tight end premium scoring. You've only got 2 wide receiver spots, but 2 flexes. And it creates an interesting dynamic where you have a lot of flexibility in terms of the way you can achieve that upside, right? Like you can go, bully tight end and get like a lot of upside that way. Generally, I'm trying to draft wide receiver heavier rooms. The teams that draft RB heavier, they can get away with it in this league because they can start 4, but at the same time, because they can start 4, sometimes those RBs go earlier. So it's a little bit of a mix. But do you find yourself in terms of how you're filling the flex, does that end up being similar from team to team, or is it pretty different just based on how the draft shakes out?
I think those spots are generally always going to be different. Ideally, you'd like to have receivers in those spots, but the way that every draft is different and every draft spot is different. So you can go into a draft saying, oh, I want to have 5 receivers in the first 6 rounds, but sometimes that draft doesn't let you have that. So you have to be flexible. Usually we don't like going 3 running backs early. I think that's probably our least favorite strategy. We have been doing 2 running backs early a little bit. So I think that's a fine strategy. But with the flexes, I don't think you have to have one specific position in there. It's probably optimal to have receivers in there, but if the draft doesn't let you have that, I think you just got to play the best player available and be like water in these draft rooms and make sure that you're building your team optimally and not set a particular strategy for one pick. I think that's probably best.
Yeah, that makes sense. And going back to something Dom said too about, being smart and balanced and kind of realizing what you have as a team, like your guys' Zay Jones pickup, for example, like I don't know if I make that pickup because I'm kind of like at a certain point for a wide receiver, I'm only looking at ceiling. Like there's just certain guys I'm just not taking. And I don't know if I would have been sharp enough to say like, sure, he's not like this huge ceiling player, but like he's good enough to, to fill out.
So for our team this year, we took Allen Robinson at the 312, and we were having a feeling that like that might not be a great pick after week 1. So we were looking at receivers on waivers, trying to find anything, and Jacksonville was an offense we thought was interesting enough to take their WR2 on. And
there was a couple other guys I think we had priority. I'm blanking on who they were. He wasn't like our most expensive bid that week, but to Kaz's point, and just like if I was giving advice and saying to people out there, hey, if you want to work on your gamesmanship in fantasy football, Allen Robinson was concerning right away. Yeah. And we ended up dropping him, I believe, by week 7 or week 8. I think it was
earlier.
Was it their bye week?
It was week 2 or 3.
We were decisive about realizing that, like, hey, there might be a need here that needs to be filled. Just waiver strategy in general. I mean, like, it's going to be more fruitful earlier in the year, right? Like, ideally, you'd want to take your biggest cracks at waivers in the first, like, 2 to 4 weeks of the season, right? So Zay Jones was definitely if you held on to your priors too strongly about Zay Jones, like you may not have been interested in like, there's probably not real ceiling here. Like, he seems like he's just a volume driven guy. And I don't know, man. I mean, if you run the season 100 times last year, like what percentage of those is Zay Jones, like getting the amount of targets that he does? Like, I don't know, it's probably not more than 50%, but like identifying a need, acting decisively, and like not afraid of being wrong, I guess, or like clutching onto your priors too carefully was just a couple of the things that got us on Zay when we were.
Yeah, and there's just this push and pull between like upside in terms of the talent of the player and then just like the opportunity in front of them. And like as you said, like trying to not hold on to your priors, like you want to hold on to your priors, but not too much, just kind of being a little bit open-minded. And, I did a podcast with Davis Maddock with Bold Takes recently, and I'm pretty into Christian Kirk this season, but part of it's like almost like what happened with Zay Jones, where it's like, oh, like what if he just runs a little bit purer than we think? Like it doesn't feel like a big upside pick, but like it can still hit. And I'm having a tough time describing it, but like it can still, if you have that type of volume on like an offense like Jacksonville that's going to throw a lot, has a young quarterback that you are expecting to get a lot better, and you're just out there running routes, like good things could happen, even if that's not, the exact archetype of the player that, you optimally want to take.
I really appreciated you confirming my priors about Christian Kirk being a very good pick this year when I heard that on the Bold Take cast. I was like, thank you. Someone else is not like 1,000% sure that Calvin Ridley's just like definitely going to be the one. So I appreciated that.
We'll see how it turns out. I feel like it could be tough out of the gate. I feel like Ridley's going to come out with some juice, but it's a long season. Christian Kirk's got this. One last specific question I had for you guys. Obviously you guys have had to adapt to how the landscape has changed. You won 2 years in a row, and every year is different, but like in particular, it feels like each year keeps getting more and more different. And at quarterback, I guess there's two things specifically that have changed. The quarterback over the years has changed a lot, where, went from like late round quarterback was the best way to play it to these second tier elites last year, like Mahomes. What'd you say you guys got him, like 5-6 turn or something? Just
5-6
absurd. I think we took him in our ETR did a 10K FFPC last year, and we took him similarly. And now he's going 2-3. So like this year, it's like, it feels to me that quarterback is wide open as far as how you can play it, as opposed to previously you could kind of systemically do the same thing each draft.
Just wait.
Yeah. Do you guys have any takes on QB? Like, is it flexible to you, or you think you're waiting more times than not?
I think it's somewhat for me. It's flexible. I don't mind the quarterbacks in that third round range. I prefer it. I think we as a group would prefer the late third round to get them, but I think it's okay. I think a lot of what's happened with the market just is looking at exactly what happened last year, where three guys accelerated way past the field. I compare it sometimes to what happened with Kelsey a little bit, where he was just so far past the field that it felt like you just had to have him. And it feels kind of similarly with those top three quarterbacks, where it just feels like you have to have one of them because of how consistent they are, how often they're just putting up these 35-point weeks every week, and the rest of the field just seems to lag behind. Now, is that going to change this year? I mean, part of it is what we're seeing with the Kelsey pick, where Kelsey goes in that early one. Mahomes just makes sense in that early 3 to stack it. And then the other quarterbacks just immediately follow because, they score such similar amounts of points. So you get those early 3 and sometimes 4 with Lamar. I don't mind taking them there, but I think it's probably wise to be looking at that kind of second-ish tier that you're getting in the 5-6, even with Lawrence and Herbert, specifically even Burrow, that you can get a little bit of value. You can build a little bit of a sharper, stronger, earlier team with your skill positions, and then fill in a potential top 3 quarterback in those spots where you're not spending a third-round pick on one.
Yeah, and seasons can play out. I mean, they only play out one way, but they could have played out different ways. I think last year, how I've talked about this recently a few times, so it might be a little bit redundant, but Tom Brady and Trey Lance in these managed leagues start to fall compared to best ball because of the scarcity is different. Those guys were going in like double-digit rounds come the last week of draft season last year. I think they had, not top 3 ceilings, but they had top 6 type ceilings. And if those guys hit, maybe the market's treating things a bit differently this year. But you guys mentioned 9 drafts you're doing total. I'm curious how that's split up in terms of, time frame, when your earliest draft starts and how many you guys got coming up, and if you're headed back to Vegas this year.
Yeah, we did 3 early, 4 late, or no, 4 early, 4 late.
4 early, 5 early, 3 late.
Math. I'm so good at math.
Yeah.
So we wanted a few early. We definitely wanted not the July 4th slows.
Yeah, we're not slow drafters.
Not for this. I'll do it for best ball. I mean, just me personally, like I have 2 kids. I have a pretty demanding job. Like slow drafts work really well for me personally on best ball, but for this, I'm not as into them. But we wanted to kind of get some as soon as the fasts opened up. So we're split about 50-50. We are coming back to Vegas, doing 3 mains in Vegas and a $1,500 auction, which should be pretty fun. And we have a little bit of homework still to do on it for sure.
The auction's off. I did an auction last year. It was a lot of fun.
I don't want to. I mean, we're taking it seriously, but I'm kind of doing it for fun. Like I'm excited to just jump in and like do
you
one
win
live
2 main
too.
events in a row. You can throw one in for fun.
I'll say it that way. That's a good way to put it. Can I just piggyback one more thing on quarterback real quick?
Yeah,
I'll just
absolutely.
say personally, like we've had a number of discussions about this, and I don't think it's like officially reached an endpoint. I don't think this is like solved. we don't have an elite quarterback yet. We did pass on Mahomes with the Kelsey team. I am struggling to see how an early first, early third quarterback tight end stack, or like even the like Hurts Devontae Smith, this is a very expensive, very popular stack. I'm like very much struggling to see how you're going to win in the sprint, paying that much for a stack that's going to be so highly owned. I will say too, I think we looked at this last night. Like Mahomes outscored Kirk Cousins by like 8 points, 11 points in the sprint.
Wow.
And that's obviously
less
only
than you would think.
Less than you would think. 2 weeks of no Jalen Hurts. Obviously, Allen and Burrow missed the game. Allen was actually pacing to outscore Mahomes in the sprint as well.
Lamar was
hurt. Like Mahomes scored 91 points, which obviously like 3 straight 30-point weeks. Like, yes, that's going to be what you need probably to win. And it's not to say that he couldn't do that again. That delta is not that high. And when you see like Dak Prescott and Kirk Cousins were 2 and 3 and like kind of nipping at their heels, it's like, wow, I am going to pay for this really, really expensive premium stack. Am I really getting that much out of quarterback here? I mean, you could, like, if you're going to pick any quarterback to score 35 plus 3 straight weeks, it would be the 3 that are going early. I totally get that and understand it. But to me, it just seems like expensive, popular, and like, what are you really, really getting that you can't get a little bit later?
And I think an important thing with that is a lot of the youth is being pushed up this year. So if you're trying to catch up on your skill positions, it's going to be much harder if you do that quarterback tight end early. It's a lot harder to catch up.
That's a super important point. I was kind of making that point when we're in a slow draft. Myself, Jack Miller, and Mark Dinkelman, we took Breece Hall in the 5th as our second running back. And, generally we're wide receiver heavy, but 1, we just like that ceiling in a vacuum. But 2, Nick, like I have less like quote unquote 0 RB candidates that I love than I feel like in last year's that I can get in rounds, 8 through 12. Whereas, last year it was like, okay, great. Kenneth Walker, Rashad White, some of these guys, like I'm for sure taking this year. Yeah. Ramondre. There's definitely some that I like this year and even some bets that I like in that spot, but probably a bit less. I am hopeful the youth at wide receiver remains undervalued in these drafts, but we'll see. It seems like they're going a little bit less in managed than they are in some of these best ball formats right now.
We could use a rookie class of receivers to not be great right away and maybe like check the ADP a little bit. Because like ADP is moving up for these guys like very, very correctly. But it seems like one class after another has been like quite good here. And like hopefully that's not going to stay that way forever, but we'll see.
Yeah. And it was, this year was supposed to be maybe not as good of a class, but all these guys are in such great spots. Like the injury to JSN sucks, but Addison seems like he's in a great spot for him. Quentin Johnston has the huge ceiling. Zay Flowers is just tearing up camp artists. So we'll see how it goes. How many of those guys you can get in rounds 7 through 10, or if they all go like 6, 7, come final draft time will be a big difference in terms of how you can construct teams. But I really appreciate the time. If you guys have anything else that you want to talk about, feel free. If not, I think this has been great.
Yeah, absolutely. We appreciate you having us on. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, we'll have to get wings again sometime soon.
Yes, for sure.
Do that. And Dom, I don't know if you've signed up for an ultra yet, but
I was actually just talking about this with my trainer yesterday. I was like, I was really noodling on like running a big race, but I haven't quite got started. I need something though. I don't want to diatribe too much, but it's like, okay, I set out to accomplish some things in fantasy football, and I've done that. I'm a very like goal oriented, like a little bit of a hobbyist, like kind of change up what you do. I need something else, and like an ultra seemed like challenging enough where maybe I could take a crack at it, but it's also very, very intimidating, especially out in my neck of the woods. So we'll see. It's
intimidating, very challenging, but your speed matters a little bit less than some other races. So it's like also kind of like this mental, like if you want to put in the time and do it, you can probably grind your way through it. I say that without having actually done it. I'm going to do my first one.
I just turned 32, nice. But I mean, I am in better shape than I was like 5 years ago when I did do a road race marathon. So and your mind is much stronger than you think, right? Like you put enough effort into something and you set your mind on it, like you could probably achieve it.
Absolutely. Love it. Well, thanks again, Dom, Sean, and Nick. Best of luck this season trying to take down the 3P. That would be insane if you're able to pull it off.
0%.
0%. No shot. Zero.
If it's not us, we hope it's you, Mike.
All right. Hey, me too. Me too.
Keep that championship in Buffalo.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, sir. Thanks so much, everybody, for tuning in. Again, the Established Edge YouTube channel is launched. So if you're listening on audio, want to check out the video version, it is up there. Best of luck this draft season.
Good shit, boys.
Yeah, good draft. I don't know why this isn't ending. I'm getting a spinning wheel. But,
I was like, I didn't want to just hang up, but I'm like, okay.
No, we're still.
I hit the end
stream.
recording and it just like
right next to me.
It's still going.